Hi. Those of you that have picked up success-driven logic already will have noticed one of the chapters is titled The Work. I chose that title specifically because it leads you to understand that there's a certain implied message to the word, and that message is commitment. If you want to improve through practice, it requires some work. It requires a commitment. And our game is a pretty straightforward and simple game, but regardless of anything, if you want to improve, it's practice that makes the job. It's the work that goes with the practice that gets you to where you want to go. I also want to, towards the end of this segment, I want to talk a bit about the pre-COVID and COVID experience now, talking in September of 2021, what practice may roll out looking like, what that work required for us may look like, based on my simple observations of league bowlers within the major league within Saskatoon, and I guess ultimately making that message implied to mean and be specific to bowlers of Canada. Anyway, let's get started at looking at the topic work. Work requires the commitment as mentioned. With that, though, there have been some scholars that have investigated exactly what that commitment may look like. Maxwell Gladwell was one of the first to talk about something called the 10,000 hour rule. He suggested through his research, which included visiting many of the athletes that kind of were outliers in the world of sport. In other words, they came from areas or regions of a country that was totally unexpected. Was not expected that these people would have been excelling like this, as if the odds were stacked against them to be successful. Another author by the name of Duckworth explained work in terms of grit, and her work recognized that it wasn't the intellectual capacity of an individual. It wasn't anything related to intelligence. It wasn't anything related to physical skill set going into something that will determine whether or not you have success. But rather, it is something called grit, which is basically boils down to commitment, fortitude, your interest in pursuing something, your passion related to pursuing it, and the outlook, the growth mindset outlook towards improvement. The other person that reinforced all of that was a woman by the name of Carol Dweck. And her work, again, along with a gentleman by the name of Erickson, also reinforced the concept of productive or deliberate practice. I use the word productive. They frequently, they being the authors aforementioned, often refer to something called deliberate practice. So, productive practice. Productive practice is, we can go simply and say it's a matter of how we use our time when we're at the lanes, right? Part of that, though, involves you arriving to the lane, knowing what you want to work at. And there are basically two ways of dividing the work that you're going to do. One, mindset. Two, physical skill sets. And oftentimes there's an interplay. One benefits over the other, right? So there's a real benefit in using, understanding that when you're working on your physical skill sets, there's also the value of developing your mindset as well. Okay? All right. So some of the things that can get in the way, I mentioned two that tend to come up quite frequently as I work with athletes. One is this notion that there may not be a shortcut, but there is a quicker fix to the problem than what I may be intimating at. Okay? And the other is this idea of self-enforced limits. Individuals who want to improve, but they see that they've only got a certain amount of skill set with them, and so they stop right there. Part of that self-enforced limits is a matter of a mindset of growth, seeing things as a challenge, and a problem to be resolved rather than a hurdle that is insurmountable. The quick fix notion has been evidenced many, many times over in the game of 5-pin. I tell a story in the chapter about people who would come to prepare for a tournament, and they'd come in and practice 2 or 3 weeks, maybe once a week, and just to get ready for the tournament. The tournament would roll around, they'd come and play in the tournament, and as long as the wheels didn't fall off, they'd be doing fine, they'd do all right. But as soon as a stressor arrived, they would return to bad habits, and typically their ship got sunk because of these return of bad habits, all right, or less productive habits, let's say, all right? So the idea or the notion of a quick fix is problematic. Rather than looking for a timeline in terms of a quick fix, look at it as a growth opportunity. You will continue to improve as long as you put in the work. If you improve without that, quite often it's in spite of yourself, and it is a short-lived reality for you. The self-enforced limits is oftentimes connected heavily to the mindset of how we approach seeing our improvement and how that rolls into our play in league or in tournament. All right. The third part I want to mention here is our role at a practice is to narrow the gap between how we play in a practice and how we compete in a tournament. So we bring to the practice the same intent that we bring to the tournament play. We also bring the same intent to our league play that we would bring to a tournament. So we try and normalize that experience right across the board between practice, league, and tournament. All right? So narrowing the gap in terms of our intent, the energy that we put forth in practice to emulate what we do in league and tournament. We're trying to normalize or level the playing field so that we're entering all of those stages of our development with the same level of intent and interest. Okay? So, as you read the book, you'll also notice that I spend some time talking about how you organize your practice. One of the most important messages in all of this, though, is I said right off the gun at the beginning, was to come to practice understanding what you want to work on. In other words, don't just show up the lanes and throw balls and wait to see what you need to work on, because maybe if all you do typically is throw balls down the middle and see how many strikes you can get, maybe you're going to say, oh, I don't need practice. Look at all these strikes coming. So let's take a moment to understand, by coming to practice with a predetermined goal, it can always be flexed and changed a bit, modified, but coming to practice with a predetermined goal puts you in a place where you apply yourself more readily to your task at hand. A predetermined goal is not necessarily about scorekeeping. It's not necessarily about competition. Excuse me. It can be about something as important as the consistency of you holding your follow-through. It can be working on the elements of speed, lift, and rotation as it applies to your approach and delivery. Remember, as noted in earlier casts, the most important skill set you can develop is the quality of your follow-through, and that the quality of your follow-through is influenced by 3 factors: speed, lift, and rotation. The quality and the effectiveness of your approach and delivery is also influenced by speed, lift, rotation. So they go hand in hand, they're connected. Can't separate them. So our game is pretty straightforward, isn't it? Hold your follow through. Work on speed, lift, and rotation. Easy. So anyway, now you've come to practice. Let's say you're going to come to practice, and what you're looking at is you gave yourself a goal of being more consistent. Okay, I want you to just give a little more thought to what that consistency is going to look like and how would you get there. Okay, so you raise your hand and say, well, I just want to be more consistent. I want to see my average go up. All right, well, tell me, what will you do? What sort of things will you do to see that average go up 5 points? That is the question. That's the most important part. Coming to practice with a generalized goal, fine, but try and drill down into the specifics of what that will encompass you doing, because those things, those incremental steps, are goals. So I want to improve your average 5 points. All right. Maybe you're going to come to the lane and broken record time here, but hold your follow through. Maybe you're going to work on the consistency of how many times, what's the frequency of you holding your follow through. Maybe you're going to work on elements related to speed, because holding your follow through is more difficult when you rush. So you work on some strategies that help you maintain a consistent speed. The book talks about some particular strategies that help you address speed. Maybe it's about lift. Maybe it's about rotation. All right? Again, within the book, there are some suggested possibilities to help you do that. You most likely have some ideas of your own already. But step one then, come to your practice session with a specific goal in mind. Be clear and specific about it. Secondly, repetition. I think a practice needs to be at least 90 minutes. 60 minutes when you consider how much time it might take you to get yourself ready. Sometimes we start that clock as soon as we walk in the door. Don't do that. Start the clock as soon as you pick up your first bowling ball. Don't start the clock as soon as you walk into the bowling center. Start the clock when you pick up your first ball off the lane. Start the clock then. 90 minutes. Warm up. Then you have a specific skill you want to work on. Speed, lift, rotation, whatever it is. May I suggest that if you're working on speed and rotation and lift, you may also want to look at the follow-through drills that are available in the book as well, because those give you some really great drills to help you work on your speed, your lift, and your rotation. All right. You came to practice, got a timeline now. You're starting when you pick up your first ball, and you're there for 90 minutes. I'm going to cut to the end. At the very end, I want you to spend, of that 90 minutes, I want you to give yourself 5 to 10 minutes to write a journal. Write notes down in a journal, in a notebook, wherever, maybe on your phone. Excuse me. And put some jot notes down for yourself about how this practice went, what stood out, what was achieved, okay? Do you need more work on some things? Okay, anyway, so come into the door, practice starts when you pick up your first ball, you're there for 90 minutes. You're going to come with the intent to narrow the gap, in other words, the intent to normalize the playing field between practice, league, and tournament. Good. And you've got some skill sets you're going to work on within the structure of your practice. Now, make a point of separating within your practice a period of time where you work on your physical skills, and then give yourself a period of time, 20, 30 minutes maybe, where you test out how are you doing at accomplishing that goal, all right? And oftentimes that's just through the simple action of throwing 1 or 2 regular games and making notes. If you look within the book, you'll also find some games and drills, and one of them that I particularly like is something called data, 5-set averaging. And basically what you do is you throw a ball at whatever skill set you're doing. Let's say it's corner pins, strikes, whatever it is. Maybe it is on the quality of holding your follow through. And you see how well you do at that. And you simply measure it. Yes, ball 1, did it. Ball 2, a little off balance. Ball 3, did it. Ball 4, oh, I overextended, I rushed. Overextending is when you reach up too high, your feet come closer together at the end of your approach. You're standing up at the end of the lane. So record this consistency of that follow through, all right? That is called a 5-set averaging, and you do that with 5 balls on 5 different occasions. And then you look at that data and see how you've done. And you can spread that out through regular games as well, if you like. Okay, so that's your practice session. Now I'd like to turn my attention to the COVID experience as I've recognized it within the league bowling done by our elite players here in Saskatchewan, and particularly in Saskatoon. Here's what I've noticed. The people that are averaging over the 240 mark pre-COVID have come in and found out, yes, they're rusty, but their adjustment to being away from the game has been easier. I believe it's been easier simply because they're more proficient. However, while it has been easier, they have also noticed inconsistencies in that they've recognized some of these deliveries through the course of a regular night of league bowling have not been all that consistent. Maybe that consistency was reflected by the quality of the strikes they got. Maybe it was reflected by the inconsistency of sparing. All right, ultimately a little bit of practice would rectify that. Where the COVID experience has really hit hard seems to be in the people that are averaging under the 240 mark. And there, because their skill sets are not as entrenched and as mastered, there's significant decay in their approach and delivery, and in their ultimately the accuracy of their balls that they throw down the lane. Bottom line, practice. Practice. Ironically, what I'm seeing is a lack of practice. Does not surprise me necessarily. They're going with the idea that, well, if I bowl enough times in league, it'll all work itself out. Well, maybe, but I'm quite confident that if you put in some practice, it'll work itself out a heck of a lot quicker than if you sit back and just rely on showing up for your one night of league play. By the way, that practice that you're going to do, if you want to see real gain, bowl a league, 2 leagues, whatever it might be, but get in and practice 2 to 3 times a week. Can you commit to 2 to 3 times a week for 3 months and see how that can go? Excuse me. I know in our hometown, that's a significant time management problem if you've got a job and a family, etc. And it's a bit of a juggling act because some of the bowling centers, in terms of lane availability, you may indeed need to go practice during, I call it darkness bowling and glow bowling, or whatever they call it now, when all the lights are off and everything's aglow. Anyway, 2 to 3 times a week for 3 months and see how it goes. So my final comment, post-COVID, during COVID right now, I guess. We haven't got to post-COVID yet. Those of you under 240, you're experiencing a greater loss in skill. And it's not that you won't regain it. It's just a matter of practicing. And the key is practice. Those of you that are relying on just simply showing up for league play, throwing a few balls before the league starts, I believe you're in the game a much longer time before you're going to start noticing any change in that. And who knows whether you will or not. Go in and practice 2 to 3 times a week, and you may see some self-correction in that inconsistency quicker than in the 3-month time frame. Wouldn't that be nice? Go practice. It feels so much better to be able to execute at the level of proficiency you've come accustomed to. Get out and practice. All right, that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate you to take the time to tune in and listen. Take care. Play well. Drop me a note at Success Driven Logic if you're interested in ordering a book, or if you're interested in just having a conversation with me about your bowling. Thank you. SuccessDrivenLogic@gmail.com. Good night.